What is up, everybody? Coach Juma here, and today we're going to be breaking down the importance of mobility. Maybe you've heard the term thrown around before, but we're going to be breaking down why mobility is important, what joints you need to mobilize, and my personal mobility routine that helps my joints stay fluid so I can have an effective training session without wasting any time. So you might have heard the word mobility before, like I said, but what does it even mean? Mobility is your joint's ability to move around through their full range of motion before being restricted by the surrounding ligaments, tendons, and muscles. Now, this is different than flexibility, which is really your muscle's ability to go through a lengthened position at will. Mobility focuses on the joints, flexibility focuses on the muscles, and flexibility can be used to improve mobility, but they're not the exact same thing. Improved mobility will not only help you use your joints through a greater range of motion, but it's going to help you have healthier joints, improve posture, less aches and pains, less stiffness, and will help you use your muscles better, squat deeper, bench press heavier, jump higher, or whatever other athletic thing you want to do. Mobility will help you achieve that. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, if you don't have mobility in these joints, you can't use them to their fullest capacity. So instead of trying to work with immobile joints, improve the mobility so that you can improve your strength, so you can improve your force output and get better workouts out of it. Now, not all joints are meant to be mobile. There's something called the mobility stability continuum, and certain joints are meant to be stable. They have a fixed range of motion, and others are meant to be mobile and move through greater ranges of motion. You can see an example with the skeleton here, what that looks like. So you'll see going through the body that your joints alternate between stability and mobility. Your ankles are meant to be mobile, your knees are meant to be stable, your hips are meant to be mobile, your lower back is meant to be stable, your thoracic spine, which is your middle back, is meant to be mobile, your shoulder blades are meant to be stable, your shoulders are meant to be mobile, elbows are meant to be stable, wrists are meant to be mobile. And you can kind of see the difference using these joints. Your ankles and hips can move through different planes of movement because they're meant to. Now, the problem with a lack of mobility is that if one joint on the mobility stability continuum isn't as mobile as it should be, the stable joints will have to work overtime to make up for that lack of mobility. So you'll see that a lot of people will experience knee pain or low back pain. The problem isn't with the low back or the knees usually. It's usually due to a lack of mobility at the hips, at the ankles, or at the thoracic spines, the joints immediately above and below it. So if you find yourself with any kind of joint pain, it'll help to improve the mobility of not just that joint in particular, but the joints around it as well. So now that we know the importance of mobility, how can we use that to improve our training sessions? Well, before you get started with training, knowing what you're going to work out and knowing what joints are going to be used is going to be helpful to allow you to get the most out of the exercise as you perform it. So if you know you're going to be squatting, for instance, starting your workout with some ankle mobility, some hip mobility, and even some shoulder mobility, because that's going to be what's holding the bar up, can help you get a more effective squat because you've already primed your joints to be able to move through a greater range of motion before you've added any load to it. Likewise, with upper body, if you're doing a bench press or an overhead press, making sure that your shoulders and wrists are ready to take on a load and go through a full range of motion will help you get more out of your bench press that day. So it can be specific to the day, or you can choose to mobilize all your joints in one day, which I typically recommend, especially if you have the time for it. This will help improve your mobility in the short term, but also in the long term as well. Because to improve your mobility overall, you need to actually practice mobilizing your joints to get better at it. Just like you need to practice bench pressing to get better at bench pressing and bench press more weight. Now, before I go through the main joint mobility exercises that I like to use, it's important to remember how to do these exercises to get the most out of them. You don't want to be moving through these joints as fast as you can or doing them for reps. You want to concentrate on the range of motion, moving slowly and deliberately and with purpose, because these exercises can only be as effective as your attention to them. If you're going through them mindlessly, you won't get much benefit out of it. If you're really focusing in on feeling your muscles move, feeling your joint flex, feeling it rotate through a full range of motion, and understanding what it's going through, you're going to get so much more out of the movement. So remember, before starting with any of these exercises, give them your full focus for every single rep that you do, because that's how you're going to actually improve your mobility over time. All right, so now here are my go-to mobility exercises for each joint, starting from the bottom and making our way up. With the ankles, my go-to is always the half kneeling ankle mobility exercise. This one's a great one because it really pushes you to get through a full range of motion, and it's really easy to do. You could do it anywhere at any time. The goal here is to try to get your ankle and shin angle as small as possible. So that means driving your knee forward past your toes as far as you can, and keeping that heel flat on the ground at the same time. You don't want your foot flexed as you come up, because that's not really challenging the ankle anymore so much as it's challenging the muscles in your foot. So what this looks like is getting in a half kneeling position, having 90-90 angles in your knees, driving your one knee forward past your toe as far as you can, holding that position for a couple seconds, and then bringing it back before repeating again. You want to make sure that your hips are square as you do this, because otherwise you'll get an inaccurate gauge for how mobile your ankles end up being. You can make this exercise more challenging by adding a weight on your thigh to push the knee more forward, but the same principles apply either way. Make sure your foot is flat, make sure you're driving your knee forward, make sure your hips stay square, and do that 3 to 5 reps for each leg before your leg day, or even in between sets if you feel like it gets tight as you use it. Moving up to the next mobile joint that we have, we're going to be working on the hips. My go-to exercise for hip mobility is shin boxes. The reason I like shin boxes a lot is because they challenge a lot of the different movement patterns all at the same time. Your hip does a lot of things. It rotates, it extends, it abducts and adducts, it goes sideways in and out just like your shoulders, and we want to make sure that it can move properly through all those planes at once. So here we're going to be demonstrating the shin box exercise. You're starting in a position on the ground, butt on the floor, and your knees are in a 90-90 position. Now from this position, you're going to make sure you're sitting tall, your tailbone is on the floor, and you're going to rotate to one side as far as you can and hold that for a few seconds before rotating to the other side and repeating. To really push the rotation of your knees while you're twisting your upper body, make sure that your knees, shins, and feet stay on the floor the entire time. You want to make as much contact with the ground as you can. If you can't quite get your entire leg making contact with the ground yet, that's okay. Just push as far as you can, and over time it will get better. Before switching sides, I always personally like to add extra force rotation for both legs. So picking up your shin, getting it as high to the ground as you can, really getting a good stretch in your hip flexor / groin area, and bringing it back down. Repeat that with both legs. One will usually be higher than the other, and that's completely normal. And then switch your shin boxes to the other side and repeat that process. So shin boxes do a really good job of mobilizing the rotation aspect of your hips, as well as the abduction and adduction aspect of your hips. Now to mobilize the flexion and extension aspect of your hips, I like to go through the hip flexor stretch, as I like to call it. So this is where you're standing up tall, you're placing one foot on an elevated surface, and you're driving your hips forward as far as you can with one arm up above you. As you drive your hips forward, you're going to feel a good stretch in your hip flexor, and you need to exhale to really get the full release of your hip flexor as you do this. And while you exhale, start laterally flexing your torso away from your hip and toward the leg that's on the floor. You want to hold that position for a few seconds while strongly exhaling, and repeat for 2 to 3 reps before switching sides. The next joint that we're going to be trying to mobilize is going to be your thoracic spine. What I like to focus on with the thoracic spine is improving rotational mobility more than anything else. So we're going to be demonstrating the thread the needle stretch here. You're going to start in a quadruped position with both knees down on the ground, hands under your shoulders. You're going to take one arm and reach through as far as you can across your body. But the important thing here is to keep your hips square to the ground. When you twist your hips, the rotation doesn't come from your thoracic spine anymore. It's coming from your hips. So we want to make sure that only your thoracic spine is rotating. Your shoulders can twist sideways, but your hips stay facing the floor. There needs to be that separation there. Reach as far as you can, do a few pulses to get an extra longer reach, and then once you're done with that, switch sides and repeat for the same number of reps. So that takes care of thoracic spine. From there, we're going to the shoulder joint. And what I like to mobilize with the shoulder joint is a band wraparound exercise. So here we're going to demonstrate the band wraparound exercise. You're going to grab a band just a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. The closer together, the more challenging it's going to be, but start wider and work your way in. You're going to try and keep your elbows straight and raise your arms overhead and bring them around your back until the band touches the back of your thigh, and then bring it back forward to the starting position until the bands touch the front of your thigh. You want to repeat that for about 10 reps with full control. You don't want to just flap your arms down to your thigh in either direction. Maintaining control, maintaining the pace, and really feeling your shoulder move through its full range of motion. And then the last joint that we're going to be working on here is your wrists. And what I like to do with the wrists is wrist cars as well as pails and rails. Yeah, so CARs stand for controlled articulated rotations, and it's really just taking your wrist, flexing it as far as you can, keeping your forearm stable, and rotating it through the full range of motion in a slow and controlled manner. You're going to do that in both directions for about 5 reps, and you're really trying to challenge how far you can move your wrist without assistance. And the more often you do it, the further you'll be able to move it over time. And the last thing here is going to be pails and rails with your wrists. You can do this on a table, you can do this on the floor, anywhere you want, but you're going to start with your palms on the table. Keep straight elbows and start with your shoulders directly above your wrists. Now you're going to reach forward with your shoulders, lean forward so that your wrists are starting to get flexed, and you're going to push your hands into the ground while you do this. This is going to challenge not only your wrists, but the forearm muscles that connect from your wrists to your elbows to help get a good stretch and strengthen that joint as well. Rock back after pushing for a few seconds and repeat that a couple of times. And then you want to do it in the other direction as well. So now instead of having your palms on the surface, you're going to have the back of your hands on the surface, and you're going to be rocking backwards to get a greater stretch. And you're going to drive your hands into the ground the same exact way that you did before, just using the back of your hands. Again, repeat that for a couple reps. And now with all of these different mobilizing exercises, you have a really good foundation for a warm-up for your next workout day, whether it's upper body or lower body, to help get the most out of it. Again, I highly encourage anyone, if you have wrist pain, shoulder pain, hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain, to do all of these exercises in your free time whenever you get a chance. The more you do it, the more mobile your joints will get, the better you'll feel on a day-to-day basis, and the more effective your training sessions are going to be. So there's no harm in doing these more often. So try these out, let me know how you like them, and if you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and share this with a friend, and until next time, stay stupid.